Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here, and welcome back to the Ranking of King. I know it's been a minute since I've done one of these, and we are back with the Drawing of the Three, Book 2 of the Dark Tower series, and this was published in 1987, and it contains illustrations by Phil Hale. So when I first read this series, I did not like Drawing of the Three that much. The Gunslinger had led me to believe that the series was a weird western, set in a more fantastical world. And so I was a little disappointed that the Drawing of the Three was mostly set in New York. Now, while it did contain, or does contain, elements of science fiction and fantasy, you have Roland. It's kind of like quantum leaping into different bodies, into different lives of people in New York. It didn't really grab my imagination and my attention as I was hoping, as the Gunslinger did. But as I read further into this series, I realized just how wrong I was about this book and the series in general. The Dark Tower is not just a weird western. I think in many ways, the Dark Tower series is more like a theme park, with each book and parts of each book taking place in different lands. It's kind of like Disneyland in a way, where you have the tower is kind of like Sleeping Beauty's castle at the center of the park, and then each book or parts of a book take place in different lands and different realms around the Dark Tower. And that is a concept that becomes more and more apparent and more important as the series goes on, and we learn about its real themes, about storytelling, about the importance of story, and about how different stories have different meanings and to the characters and to our lives. So while the Gunslinger was a weird western, the Drawing of the Three is more like it's almost like a sci-fi grindhouse story. It's set in and around kind of like the seedy underbelly of New York, complete with drug dealers, mobsters, racism, and serial killers. And as time would go on, the book became one of my all-time favorites, and now I'm wondering if it might be my favorite. This might actually become my favorite of the series, and in that case, it would also become my favorite Stephen King book of all time, because we're approaching what used to be my favorite, and I just don't know. I don't know how the two are going to compare now. It's going to be really interesting to read one in coming up soon. But yeah, it really is that good. And it kicks things off with an opening that is just an absolute punch to the face. Prologue, this sailor, where we meet up with Roland again, and Roland is waking up from a 10-year deep sleep that he has been under since he met up with Walter, with the Man in Black, at the end of the Gunslinger. And here we have our hero who wakes up after a 10-year sleep. He's completely groggy and confused, and then all of a sudden, crunch, he gets his two main fingers on his main hand bitten off by these lobster monsters, by these lobstrosities. I mean, what the hell? Our hero is completely maimed in the first 10 pages of the second book of the 7-book series. That's when I first read that, I knew that, okay, this is not going to be a typical fantasy series, because usually heroes don't get maimed until much later. On top of that, the book is just relentlessly paced, and it is expertly structured. I mentioned in my review for it how I think King is a master of structure, and that is also true here. It's a very structured book. We have these very structured sections: the prisoner with subchapters, and then a break. then a main chapter with subchapters, another break, another main chapter, subchapters, and a final break. And so we get this very easy to understand structure. It ebbs and flows. There are highs and lows. It's like King is a master of dramatic drive, and here he was just completely on fire. The first 160 pages of the prisoner section, they're practically a non-stop suspense scene or sequence. And King somehow manages to keep the tension in escalation the entire time. And it is within these pages of The Prisoner that we first meet Eddie Dean, Roland's first companion. Eddie Dean, the prisoner. He's a prisoner to heroin. He is a heroin junkie. Roland goes through this magical door that he finds on the beach that reads The Prisoner, and he like quantum leaps into Eddie's body. Quickly, he has to figure out what's going on. He helps Eddie smuggle some drugs into America through the ritual of customs. It's really funny to see Roland being a fish out of water in modern day New York. He adapts very quickly, but he's also very confused by a lot of things. He helps Eddie out with his problems with the mob, and then Roland pulls Eddie back through the door into his world, where Eddie is now the fish out of water. And Eddie is able to overcome his heroin addiction, but he quickly substitutes the white powder for something even more powerful, and that is the Dark Tower. And like Roland, Eddie becomes a tower junkie. And then we get our first well-deserved break after that 160 pages of just relentless suspense and action. I mean, it is so amazing. It might be like the best 150 pages that King has ever written. There is not a single thing I dislike about those pages. Just absolutely top-notch genre fiction writing here. But we get a shuffle, we get a nice slow time where Eddie is coming to terms with what the hell is happening in his life. Eddie and Roland is like, he is suffering from his bite has become infected. He has a fever. He is very close to death. Eddie has to take charge. They make their way up the beach and they come to a second door. And that door reads The Lady of Shadows. And it is through this door that Roland, again, quantum leaps into the body of, this time, a black woman named Detta. And so now we're kind of in New York again, somewhere around the 1960s, I believe. And we are seeing through the eyes of this woman, Detta. Roland is inside her body, and Detta has a split personality, schizophrenic. The depiction of schizophrenia, of having split personality, is a little cliche. I think we've learned a lot about that kind of mental disease over the last 30 years, and so it's a little juvenile, but it works in the sense of a genre fiction. It works to depict what King was going for. So we have this character, Detta, who is a black woman. Detta is kind of like the real personality. She is a upper class black socialite in a white world. Her father is like, she's an heiress to a fortune that her father made creating a certain kind of dental equipment. She's quite well off. She has a driver. She lives in a nice house in a nice part of town, and she's in a wheelchair. And we'll see a connection to that later. Odetta is the other personality, and she acts and talks like a racist caricature of a black woman, one you might see in an old grindhouse film or an old television show. Eddie actually remarks that Odetta sounds like a cartoon version of Butterfly McQueen. So she is acting in an affected way, in a way that maybe other white people might project onto her. She takes those depictions of racism and like just kind of turns them up 20 notches and becomes like just a real feisty woman and really nasty. She is not a nice person at all, and there's this battle between Detta and Odetta. And Roland devises a plan to get the two personalities to confront one another. And then he pulls them through the door back into his world, where they like fuse together to become a single person, a single woman named Susanna. And then we get another well-deserved break after this kind of like really gritty, but also still with a science fiction angle depiction of racism. We are drawn back into Roland's world, and we get into another shuffle section where we get a nice little break where Eddie is having to deal with the sick Roland. He's having to deal with Detta and Odetta fighting each other, and Odetta seems to be winning. And they finally make their way up the beach where they've come across the third door, and that is the door reading the Pusher. And Roland goes into this third door. He's almost dead from his infection. The Pusher ends up being this serial killer who pushes things on people and pushes people into things. This is one of the only books I've ever read that actually made me change the way I do something in my life. When I'm waiting on a street corner now to cross, I no longer stand right at the corner because the Pusher pushes people into traffic. Really freaky. But we come to find that the Pusher has a very strong connection to Roland, a very strong connection to Susanna, Detta, Odetta, and a very strong connection to a character we met in the first book, Jake. The Pusher, we find, is the one who pushed a brick onto young Detta's head when she was a child, causing the beginning of her mental problems. He then pushed an older Detta onto the tracks of an oncoming train, crippling her, putting her in a wheelchair. He was also the one who was going to push Jake into traffic, killing him and originally sending him to the gunslinger's world. Roland enters the Pusher's body and causes all kinds of hell for this sadistic killer. He winds up getting beaten, getting shot, getting set on fire, and finally run over by a train. And Roland is able to secure some weapons, some ammo, and medicine and jump back into his world at the nick of time. So this book is it is one non-stop amazing moment after another. I cannot believe how good this book is. At our book club meeting, some of us were a little lukewarm on The Gunslinger. We all liked it, but it wasn't that like firecracker of a novel that some of us think it is. Other people were just a little lukewarm on it. Everybody just absolutely loved The Drawing of the Three. This is a fantastic, amazing book. I know some people suggest to new readers that they start with this book and then go back and read Gunslinger as a kind of flashback. I still disagree with that. I think it's best to read them in the order that Stephen King wrote and published them in, just because certain things make better sense, especially having Jake being established in The Gunslinger. And just getting a little foreshadowing here of King setting up some really interesting things. King juggling the different kinds of genres. We have the Weird West, and now we have this kind of like sci-fi grindhouse type thing. And we're going to see a lot more of that in future books. And things really start to come into focus here. I think it is in book 3 where the themes really come into focus, but we can start to see the seeds being planted in The Drawing of the Three, one of King's absolute best books, and just an absolute triumph. So here we have the placard. Here is the name I made for Drawing of the Three, the placard I made for Drawing of the Three. And we have our ranking so far at number 1, The Gunslinger, 2, Pet Sematary, It, The Mist, Desperation, Skeleton Crew, Cycle of the Werewolf, Tommyknockers, Firestarter, and Needful Things bringing up the rear here. This is no question about it. The Drawing of the Three is going straight to the top. Like I said, this might end up being my number 1. I might be, I don't know. We're going to have to see. I'm really curious how the book that used to be my number 1 is going to stand up to this. But like I said, if you guys want to think of the Dark Tower rankings maybe as a separate ranking, because you're going to be seeing a lot of them at the top here. So there is our new ranking: Drawing of the Three, Gunslinger, Pet Sematary, It, The Mist, Desperation, Skeleton Crew, Cycle of the Werewolf, Tommy Knockers, Firestarter, and Needful Things. All right, coming up soon will be The Wasteland, because we just finished that, so it shouldn't be as long in between this episode and the next one. All right, guys, take it easy. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.